The Cold Bite of Autumn in Sweetwater Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878, made the night air sharper than Eliza Patterson's last hope. Her fingers trembled as she clutched 3-year-old Timothy closer to her chest, his tiny frame radiating the only warmth in her world as she stared at the wooden signs swinging from rusty chains. Willard's Trading Post and Boarding. Her husband's grave was 7 days behind her, and their foreclosed farm even further, but the crushing weight of both still pressed down on her shoulders like twin anvils. Eliza pushed the heavy oak door open with her shoulder, the bell above jingling to announce her arrival. The trading post's interior glowed with amber lamplight, casting long shadows across barrels of flour, hanging tools, and rows of canned goods. Behind the counter stood a tall man with shoulders as broad as the Wyoming horizon, his weathered hands pausing over a leather ledger as he looked up. "Evening, madam," he said, his voice as rough as the stubble lining his jaw. "Store's closing soon, but I can help you find what you need." Eliza shifted Timothy to her other hip, his head lolling against her shoulder in exhausted sleep. "I was hoping." Her voice cracked from disuse and thirst. "I was hoping you might have work, anything at all. I can clean, cook, mend." The man stepped around the counter and Eliza noticed the slight limp in his gait. "Name's Daniel Willard," he said, keeping his distance as if sensing her wariness. His eyes, the color of faded denim, took in her threadbare coat and the child in her arms. "You look like you've traveled far." "Eliza Patterson," she replied, straightening her spine despite the ache. "My son Timothy, we've come from Nebraska, my husband." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "I need to start again." Daniel nodded, asking no further questions about what she'd left behind. "There's stew on the stove in back. Sit and eat something while we talk." Eliza followed him through a doorway into a small kitchen where a pot bubbled on the wood stove. The room held a simple wooden table with 4 chairs, well-worn but clean. Daniel ladled a generous portion of venison stew into a bowl and placed it before her, along with a chunk of cornbread. "Eat," he said simply, pouring her a cup of coffee. "The boy too, when he wakes." Eliza lowered Timothy to her lap, his small body curled trustingly against her as she picked up the spoon with trembling fingers. The first bite nearly undid her the rich flavor of real food after days of hardtack, and jerky brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to look up lest he see her weakness. Daniel sat across from her, giving her space. "Winter's coming on quick," he said, his eyes moving to the window where the first flakes of snow had begun to drift past. "Need an extra hand here." Previous girl married a cattle driver heading to Montana. "Could use someone to help with the boarding rooms upstairs and the cooking." Hope fluttered in Eliza's chest. "I can start immediately." "Pays not much," he warned. "Room and board for you and the boy plus $5 a week." It was less than she'd earned sewing back in Nebraska, but there was shelter involved, safety. "That's generous," she said sincerely. Daniel nodded once, then stood. "Finish your meal, I'll show you the rooms after." As he left, Eliza felt the tension drain from her body. The warmth of the kitchen, the fullness in her belly, and the promise of a roof made her eyelids heavy. Timothy slept soundly against her, his cherubic face peaceful for the first time in days. She would rest her eyes for just a moment before Daniel returned. Daniel Willard came back to find the woman and child both asleep at his kitchen table. Eliza's head had dropped forward, her honey-brown hair escaping its pins to curtain her face. The boy was curled in her lap like a kitten, one small hand clutching his mother's threadbare dress. Something shifted in Daniel's chest, an unfamiliar feeling he couldn't name. 6 years alone in this outpost had hardened him in ways he hadn't realized until this moment, seeing their vulnerability against the backdrop of his solitary life. "Madam," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. When she didn't stir, he hesitated, then gently touched her shoulder. Eliza jerked awake, instinctively tightening her arms around Timothy. "I'm sorry," she gasped, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I didn't mean to. Then this is home now," Daniel said, the words coming unbidden to his lips. He cleared his throat, surprised at himself. "What I mean is, you both need rest, real rest. Come, I'll show you your room." Confusion, then cautious relief crossed her face. "You're still offering the position." "Said I would, didn't I?" Daniel replied, more gruffly than intended. A Willard keeps his word. He led them upstairs to a small but clean room with a single bed covered in a patchwork quilt. "Was meant for a single person, but the boy's small. I can bring up a cot tomorrow." Eliza stood in the doorway, Timothy still drowsing against her shoulder. "Mr. Willard, I don't know how to thank you." "Daniel," he corrected. "And there's no need. Trading post opens at 7. Rest tonight, we'll sort the details tomorrow." After she closed the door, Daniel stood in the hallway longer than necessary, listening to the soft murmurs as she settled the boy into bed. It had been years since he'd heard such sounds in his establishment, the gentle hush of a mother's voice, a child's sleepy question. Downstairs, he returned to his ledger, but the numbers swam before his eyes. The war had taken his leg below the knee, and the years after had taken his brother, leaving him alone with this business and a heart he'd thought had forgotten how to feel anything but the occasional ache of his phantom limb. Now, with strangers under his roof, the trading post felt different. Like something forgotten was stirring back to life. Dawn broke with clear, cold light streaming through the window. Eliza woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until Timothy's warm weight against her side brought the previous evening rushing back. Mr. Willard Daniel and his unexpected kindness. She dressed quickly, smoothing her hair into a simple knot at her nape. Timothy protested being woken, but brightened at the promise of breakfast. "Remember, sweetheart," she whispered as she helped him into his worn clothes, "we must be on our best behavior. Mr. Willard is giving us a chance." They descended the stairs to find Daniel already at work, moving crates of merchandise from the storeroom to the trading post floor. He straightened when he saw them, his expression unreadable beneath his mustache. "Coffee's hot," he said by way of greeting. "Oatmeal too, help yourselves." Eliza found the kitchen just as they'd left it the night before, with the addition of a pot of oatmeal keeping warm on the stove. As she served Timothy, she heard the bell above the door jingle, followed by the low rumble of men's voices from the store. "Mornin', Dan," a booming voice called out. "Here you got company." "News travels fast," came Daniel's dry reply. "Ain't much news to be had," another voice chuckled. "Pretty widow with a child shows up at your door, folks are gonna talk." Eliza felt her cheeks heat. Of course there would be gossip in a small settlement like Sweetwater Creek. She'd have to steel herself against it. After breakfast, she tied on an apron she found hanging by the stove and set Timothy up with a few wooden blocks she'd carried all the way from Nebraska. Then she stepped into the trading post head high. "Mr. Willard," she said, "I'd like to start earning my keep." Daniel looked up from where he was measuring coffee beans for a customer. "These gentlemen were just asking about you," he said, with a pointed look at the two men leaning against his counter. "Sam Fletcher runs the livery. Josiah Beck has the largest cattle operation in the county." The men tipped their hats to her. Mr. Fletcher was rotund and jovial-looking, while Mr. Beck was lean and weathered, with shrewd eyes that assessed her too carefully. "Madam," Beck said, "welcome to Sweetwater. If you need anything at all, you just let us know." Something in his tone made Eliza's spine stiffen. "That's very kind, but Mr. Willard has been most generous." Daniel cleared his throat. "Mrs. Patterson will be managing the boarding rooms and the cooking," he said firmly. "Any guests will deal directly with her regarding accommodations." The men exchanged glances that Eliza couldn't interpret, but nodded respectfully. After they left, Daniel showed her around the trading post and boarding house. The upper floor had 5 rooms for rent, rarely all occupied except when cattle drives came through. The trading post carried everything from tools to fabric to canned goods, serving as the commercial heart of the small settlement. "Most important thing is keeping track of credit," Daniel explained, showing her the ledger. "Ranchers and farmers trade on account until they can pay after harvest or sale. Eliza studied the neat columns of figures. "My father was a shopkeeper before moving west," she said. "I understand the principles." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Good, that'll be helpful come inventory time." By midday, Eliza had cleaned all the boarding rooms, prepared a simple lunch, and begun to understand the rhythm of the trading post. Customers came in steadily, ranch hands picking up tobacco, women examining fabric, a young couple selecting canned goods for their new homestead. Timothy proved to be a natural ambassador, his sunny disposition charming everyone who entered. Even Daniel's stern expression softened when the boy brought him a pine cone he'd found by the back door, proudly presenting it like buried treasure. As the days turned into weeks, Eliza and Timothy settled into life at Willard's trading post. The work was hard but satisfying, and Daniel proved to be a fair employer, if somewhat reserved. He spoke little of himself, though Eliza learned bits and pieces from customers that he'd fought for the Union, lost part of his leg at Shiloh, and come west with his brother who died of fever 4 years past. In turn, she shared little of her own story, though Timothy occasionally mentioned Papa's farm in his innocent chatter. Daniel never pressed for details, and Eliza was grateful for his discretion. The first real test of their arrangement came when the November storms hit, bringing howling winds and snow that piled in drifts against the trading post's walls. Business slowed to a trickle, but 3 rooms upstairs filled with travelers caught in the weather: a cattle buyer from Chicago, a young doctor heading to Montana, and a grizzled prospector waiting out the weather before heading to the mountains. Eliza rose before dawn to keep the fires burning, prepared hearty meals for their guests, and managed the reduced store hours with competence that seemed to impress Daniel. In the evenings, after Timothy was asleep, they would sit by the kitchen fire, going over the books or simply enjoying the rare quiet. "You've changed this place," Daniel said one such evening, his voice so low Eliza wasn't certain she'd heard him correctly. "I've tried to keep everything as you prefer," she replied cautiously. Daniel shook his head, staring into his coffee cup. "Not what I meant. Before it was just a building. Now it feels like—" "Like what?" Eliza prompted when he didn't continue. He met her eyes then, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. Like something worth coming home to. The moment hung between them, fraught with possibility, until the wind rattled the shutters, breaking the spell. Daniel stood abruptly, making his excuses about checking the horses in the stable. Eliza remained by the fire, her heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm as she realized the dangerous territory she was entering. She couldn't afford to develop feelings for Daniel Willard. No matter how kind he'd been, no matter how her heart lifted when he entered a room, she had Timothy to consider. She couldn't risk their security on something as unpredictable as a man's affections. Yet that night, as she lay beside her sleeping son, Eliza found herself remembering the way Daniel's eyes crinkled at the corners when he almost smiled, and how his hands, large and callous though they were, could be surprisingly gentle when helping Timothy climb the stairs or passing her a cup of coffee. The storm raged for 3 days, isolating Sweetwater Creek from the outside world. When it finally broke, leaving a glittering white landscape under brilliant sunshine, the travelers departed and the trading post returned to its normal rhythm. But something had shifted between Eliza and Daniel, a new awareness that manifested in accidental touches and glances that lingered a moment too long. In early December, Daniel returned from a supply run to Cheyenne with unexpected treasures: new mittens for Timothy, a bolt of warm wool fabric for Eliza, and most surprisingly, a small Christmas tree strapped to his wagon. "Haven't bothered with one in years," he admitted as he set it up in the corner of the kitchen. "Thought the boy might like it." Timothy was ecstatic, dancing around the pine with unbridled joy. "Mama, it smells like Christmas." That evening, they strung popcorn and dried berries, while Daniel whittled simple ornaments from scraps of wood. The domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on Eliza, who caught herself imagining more evenings like this, more seasons, more years' dangerous thoughts that she tried to push away. "My husband never had time for such things," she said without thinking, then froze, realizing she'd mentioned Thomas for the first time. Daniel's hands stilled on the small wooden star he was carving. "What kind of man was he?" he asked quietly. Eliza measured her words carefully. "Ambitious. Determined. He had dreams of building something grand," she sighed. "When the drought came and then the bank called in the loan, he couldn't bear the failure." "He left you to face it alone," Daniel said, not a question but a statement. "Not by choice," Eliza replied, her voice dropping as Timothy played contentedly under the tree. "He took his own life. The night before the bank came," Daniel's expression darkened, "leaving you and the boy with nothing. He thought we'd be better off with the insurance money," she whispered. "But there wasn't any for—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "For suicide," Daniel completed for her, his voice gentle despite the harsh word. Eliza nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Daniel set down his knife and moved to sit beside her at the table, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him but not touching her. "My brother Seth was like that," he said after a long moment. "Always chasing the next opportunity, convinced fortune was waiting just over the horizon. When he died, I found stacks of unpaid bills hidden in his trunk, alongside plans for investments that would never happen." "You loved him anyway," Eliza said, recognizing the affection beneath his criticism. "Every day," Daniel agreed, "just as you loved Thomas despite his flaws." The simple understanding in his words loosened something tight in Eliza's chest. Tears she'd been holding back for months finally spilled over, and without hesitation, Daniel pulled her into his arms, offering his shoulder as shelter while she wept. Timothy, noticing his mother's distress, abandoned his play to climb into her lap, his small hands patting her wet cheeks. "Don't cry, Mama. We're home now." Out of the mouths of babes, Eliza thought, looking up to find Daniel watching them both with an expression that made her heart tumble in her chest. Because somehow, against all odds, this trading post with its creaking floors and smoky stove had indeed become home. As Christmas approached, Sweetwater Creek transformed. Even the most hardened ranchers and solitary trappers seemed touched by the season, bringing small gifts to trade or lingering over hot coffee in the store. Eliza baked constantly cookies and pies and bread that filled the trading post with mouth-watering aromas and brought in customers, whether they needed supplies or not. Daniel expanded the store's hours to accommodate the holiday rush and found excuses to work alongside Eliza more often than strictly necessary. Their conversations flowed more easily now, broken barriers allowing friendship to blossom into something neither was quite ready to name. On Christmas Eve, after Timothy had been tucked into bed with promises that Santa would indeed find him at the trading post, Daniel asked Eliza to join him on the back porch. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. "Got something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. "Daniel, you shouldn't have," Eliza protested, though her fingers itched to open it. "You've given us so much already." "Just open it," he urged, the ghost of a smile playing at his lips. Inside the paper was a small wooden box with an intricately carved lid, flowers and vines that must have taken hours to create. When she opened it, a sweet melody played, the tiny mechanism inside turning faithfully. "It's beautiful," she breathed, tracing the carvings with her fingertip. "Been working on it since November," he admitted. "Not much for buying gifts, but figured I could make something." "I have something for you too," Eliza said, suddenly shy as she retrieved a package from her apron pocket. "It's not as fine as your gift, but—" Daniel unwrapped it carefully to reveal a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "You made this. When did you find the time?" "Late nights," she admitted, "after you and Timothy were asleep." He wrapped it around his neck immediately, despite the fact that they were standing on the sheltered porch. "No one's made me anything in years," he said, his voice rougher than usual. They stood in silence for a moment, the music box still playing its gentle tune between them. "Eliza," Daniel finally said, "I'm not good with words, never have been, but these months with you and Timothy here." He took a deep breath. "I don't want to go back to how it was before, the emptiness." Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you saying, Daniel?" He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you. Have been since that first night when you fell asleep at my table with your boy in your arms, and I'm asking if there's any chance you might someday feel the same." The honesty in his face undid her. "Daniel," she whispered, "I've been fighting my feelings for weeks, telling myself it was too soon, that I shouldn't risk Timothy's security on my heart's foolishness." "And now," he asked, his eyes never leaving hers. "Now I'm thinking life is too uncertain, too precious to deny what's right in front of me." She stepped closer to him. "You've given us shelter, safety, a home when we had nothing, but more than that, you've given us yourself, your kindness, your strength, your heart." Daniel's free hand came up to cup her cheek. "Is that a yes, Eliza Patterson?" "To what question, Daniel Willard?" she asked, a smile blooming on her lips. "To all of them," he said simply. "To being a family, to making this home permanent, to letting me love you and Timothy for as long as I live." Eliza stood on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, a kiss as gentle as snowfall but filled with promise. "Yes," she whispered against his mouth. "Yes to everything." Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, with Timothy waking them all at dawn with his excited shouts at finding the small gifts Daniel had arranged under their tree. The trading post remained closed for the day, giving them time to simply be together, sharing meals and laughter and the quiet joy of newfound love. That evening, as Timothy played with his new wooden animals, Daniel took Eliza's hand. "I've been thinking," he said. "This place has always been Willard's trading post, first my father's, then mine and Seth's, then just mine. But it's time for a change." "What kind of change?" Eliza asked. He smiled, the full, genuine smile that still took her breath away. "How does Willard and Patterson Trading Post sound?" "Until we can make it simply Willard's again, all of us together." The meaning behind his words wasn't lost on her. "Are you proposing, Daniel Willard?" "Trying to," he admitted with a chuckle. "Seems I'm not very good at it." "On the contrary," Eliza said, squeezing his hand. "I think you're doing just fine." By the following spring, wildflowers carpeted the hills around Sweetwater Creek, and Eliza Patterson became Eliza Willard in a simple ceremony at the small church in town. Timothy, dressed in a new suit that Daniel had ordered special from Denver, proudly carried the rings, announcing to everyone that he now had a real pa again. The trading post thrived under their joint care, expanding to include a proper restaurant area where Eliza's cooking drew people from miles around. Daniel built an addition to the living quarters, giving them a proper family home attached to the business. Life wasn't always easy. Droughts came, winters were harsh, and the economy fluctuated with the fortunes of the cattle industry. But through it all, the foundation they built that first night when she fell asleep at his table and he decided they were home remained steady and true. 5 years after Eliza's arrival in Sweetwater Creek, she stood on the back porch watching Daniel teaching Timothy how to saddle a horse. At 10 years old, the boy was tall for his age, with his mother's gentle heart and his stepfather's determined spirit. Beside her, 2-year-old Sarah Willard babbled happily in her wooden playpen, while inside, 4-month-old James slept peacefully in his cradle. "Mama, look," Timothy called, proudly showing off his properly cinched saddle. "Pa says I can ride to school alone next week." Daniel caught Eliza's eye over the boy's head, his expression a mixture of pride and that ever-present love that still made her heart skip. They had built something precious here, not just a business or a home, but a family forged from broken pieces made whole again. That night, with the children asleep and the trading post closed, Daniel and Eliza sat on the porch swing he'd built the previous summer, watching the stars appear one by one. "Did I ever tell you," Daniel said, his arm warm around her shoulders, "that the night you came in I almost closed early? Had a feeling like a storm was coming. And instead I arrived," Eliza laughed softly. "Best storm that ever blew through my door," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Eliza leaned into his embrace, thinking of all the twists of fate that had brought them together. Thomas's tragic choice, the foreclosure, the long journey west, the light she'd seen burning in the window of Willard's trading post. "You remember what you said?" she asked. "That first night when Timothy and I fell asleep at your table," Daniel smiled, the memory clear in his mind. "Then this is home now," he quoted softly. "You couldn't have known how true those words would become," Eliza said, lacing her fingers through his. "Maybe some part of me did," Daniel replied. "Maybe I'd been waiting all along, not even knowing what I was waiting for until you walked through that door." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness embraced Sweetwater Creek, secure in the knowledge that whatever storms life might still bring, they would weather them together in the home they had built from a moment of kindness, a leap of faith, and a love that had grown stronger with each passing season.